officially started. We're sitting down with Airon Shaw, Executive Director of the Cohase Chamber of Commerce. And today I really wanted to sit down with you and just discuss your involvement with the Chamber, where you're from, your background. Also, because Dale was involved with the Cohase Chamber of Commerce for a long period of time, there's definitely some light discussion that we can have on that topic. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself so we can learn more about you.
Yeah. So my name is Airon Shaw. I am from Tuscumbia, Alabama. It's way down.
Way south.
It's way south. But a fun fact, it's actually Helen Keller's birthplace.
Oh,
so I grew up right down the road from her birthplace.
Very cool.
And I moved to the Upper Valley 2 years ago, so the 18th of August in 2021, to go to Vermont Law and Graduate School.
Great.
And then I graduated with my master's in restorative justice. And I know people are like, why would you want to work for a chamber of commerce and your degree is in restorative justice?
Sure.
But I took it from a standpoint of building communities, especially in like rural Vermont and New Hampshire. And like where I'm from is also kind of small. So I would say my hometown mimics the White River Junction or Lebanon area.
Oh, very
So
nice.
still not, really big. And so when I moved here, I realized like, oh, this is really rural. Like I'm not used to driving 20 minutes to go grocery shopping.
Sure.
But then I noticed that people have to drive 20 minutes to go grocery shopping, and not everyone has access to transportation, and rural parts are often forgotten about because people are like, what is Thetford or what is Fairleigh or Orford? And I'm like, it's just like 20 minutes up the road, guys. It's not that far. But they're like, that's the upper valley.
Right.
And I'm like, it's just right here.
Right.
And so I just saw the need of like people wanting to know this area and saying like, hey, even though we're not that far from, that Lebanon and White River Junction area, like we're still here.
Mm-hmm.
Businesses are here, but people don't know that they're here.
Right.
Even like me, I go to Staples and study, like, because I didn't know about Copies and More.
Oh, sure. Right. Yeah.
But
Copies and More, a great resource in Wells River, Vermont. Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, guys, you know that you can actually shop really local and go to like Copies and More and you get the same thing and it's cheaper.
Right.
But people don't know about this area. So it's also been like exposing, like, this is what I do in the upper valley.
Right.
And these are the resources. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great. So my first question is, so why did Vermont law become a target for you besides the rural element of Vermont and New Hampshire?
So really, they kind of like was like, hey, Aaron, here's a scholarship. So I was like, I can't.
Oh, great. So they made you a great offer. And
so I couldn't say no.
No, that's awesome.
So I was like, I'll come. I didn't expect to stay long. I really didn't. Like, I expected to come, get my degree, and, like, leave. Because it's Vermont. And, like, my family's like, where is that? And I'm like.
Right. Canada?
Yeah. I'm like in the middle of, like, New York and, like, New Hampshire. Like, where is New Hampshire? And I'm like, okay. All right. Maine. I'm like, okay, now go down.
Right.
And so once I got here with my son, like he started doing like snowboarding and skiing and like all of these different activities that he wouldn't do back at home.
Sure,
so we kind of like got stuck here. Like it like drew us in. Like I didn't expect this to happen.
Sure.
But it happened.
Yeah.
And now I'm
sweet.
here.
That's awesome. Okay, that's good to know because, Vermont law, we see a lot of people in the western side of the state that end up in Vermont, and then they kind of have a similar trajectory where they're like, well, we just never left Tunbridge. We really, we kind of fell in love with Woodstock. We fell in love with Barnard or whatever the township is that they reside in during their program. And so then you naturally have been involved with the State House.
Yes.
And a lot of endeavors. Do you mind speaking to what you have going on there currently and what that's looked like for you?
So I've always liked policy because I know that kind of shapes things. And so during my time at Vermont Law, I was like, I want to do something different. And my heart has always been in like social justice. And so I was like, can I lobby with a master's degree? And they're like, well, we don't really have people that lobby with a restorative justice degree. And I was like, but can I? And they're like, Yeah, of course you can. So I started with the Necrassen group, and they're based in Montpelier. But I picked like topics that were restorative, but also had to do with community and rebuilding community. And so then I realized like there's like small key elements. We just don't talk to each other. Like no one talks like, I'm having the same problem that you're having. It just may not look the same.
Sure, right.
And so, like, I learned how to kind of connect and talk to people. Like, I'm not from here, obviously. My accent definitely gives it away.
Sure.
But then also people are like, you're Black. Like, you're not from Vermont. I'm like, really? I'm like, absolutely not from Vermont. And yes. And so like it was them wanting to like learn and like how can we actually make Vermont a better place like for young people, but also like young people of color coming from different areas.
Certainly.
And so that's what kind of just like I'm just here. Like that lobbying brought that connection of like, well, these are issues that we already see in underserved and rural communities. But then also let's not forget like Black and brown people, they even have it harder in like a state like Vermont and New Hampshire.
Yep.
And the politics are so different on both sides.
Sure.
So like last year I spent this year I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my personal position on the two is definitely, New Hampshire has a lot of influence from its southern cities.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of their policy and a lot of their procedure that's what I would reflectively say is a little more capitalist, whereas Vermont tends to be a little bit more liberal. It's just kind of the way that things fall on either side of the river, especially in this part of the Twin State area. We see that kind of break down a lot. Like we see a number of people that'll come and look at Vermont or New Hampshire real estate, and they'll look across the river and they'll say, I'll never live there. And it's really just this kind of polarizing position of, whatever their standpoint is. And you can typically glean that.
Yeah.
We see a lot of red in New Hampshire. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And that's also just a fact, I
mean, it is. And then, but also realizing like, even though it is super red, like those rural communities are like, we're just forgotten about. Like
Sure.
No one thinks about rural New Hampshire or rural Vermont. And so especially when you like hear farmers out and they're like, this is the problem that we're having, but no one is listening to us. Like I kind of find that being the problem is like no one's actually listening to the people who need the support. And so when I came in like with the chamber, like I started listening to what people needed from us. So then that's how we can better serve people once I know exactly what you're needing from me.
Right.
And so I think that's was something I took from lobbying is like, we're still not listening to what they need. We're telling them. And then it just creates this bigger problem. And it's like, we could have solved this like 10 years ago if we would have just like listened to them.
Absolutely. We see a lot of that in our field too. The need for basic communication, just the lack of understanding of something greater than, the loudest voices. I mean, it's something we're always dealing with the housing challenges, trying to put people into properties, and we're seeing a lot of different positions from the people that are coming to look at our listings too. Families that are looking to get into established roots, people that are looking at like a secondary property and maybe some future development potential. And we're always just trying to best cater our presentation to that party so that we're also serving them and trying to provide the resource. I think we've been saying a lot on this podcast. We're just here to help.
Just here to help. Like,
but I feel like that's kind of what you're saying too. Like your role, your ambitions, you really just want to help. Yeah. And that's really great because we need people like that. There's a lot of folks in our area that unfortunately I feel like are somewhat segregated by their own creation. They put themselves into a box or they just don't connect with the community resources that are available. And that's something that I personally in my involvement with the chamber is I've just been trying to connect people. Yeah. And make sure everybody knows that, like, hey, talk to Airon. She'll hear you. She'll listen to what you have to say. Yeah.
Like, I want to know what you have to say. Definitely can't probably fix all of the problems.
Of course not. Right? Well, same with real estate. Dale and I are like, we look at some challenges. We're like, I don't think we can do this.
Sorry. But then there's some things like, if I don't know, I may know how to find them.
Right.
I'm a resource. And like, that's what I want people to use me as. Like, use me as a resource. So like, if you can't find it, absolutely. I may know the person or I may know where to go and find this for you.
Yeah.
But people also have a hard time like asking for help.
They do.
Just because people have been so rude to them in the past. It's like, I'm not going to continue to ask for something. And, you know, the other 10 people didn't hear me. What's going to make, you know, Airon so different? Or, you know, and it's like,
that's true.
But just come to me and I will try to make you feel as comfortable as I possibly can when you ask me for help.
That's what we say. My hospitality background leaks into real estate on a daily basis, because it's really what we're doing is we're trying to just break down those barriers of, you know, feeling discomfort, feeling like you're a fish out of water. You know, even though buying a home from like Dale and I is a very complicated process, there's a lot that goes into it. We are here to help. And I think that that's not just real estate specific. That's in any regard. I mean, how many people have you stopped and given rides on the side of the road now, Dale? What's the biker story?
Well, could you help Airon with her headset?
Yes, of course.
So the story that I always like to tell.
Sorry,
that'll make you hear a little bit better. Is that better?
Yeah.
You might be uncomfortable.
Story that I like to tell about rescuing people along the side of the road. I don't think Darren knows this one either, but
There's not many stories I don't know.
I was at Thetford Center one day. I lived out on Poor Farm Road in Thetford Center. So I was headed home across that covered bridge, which is in Thetford Center. And just on the other side was an elderly man whose truck had broken down, and he was walking up this steep hill. And I stopped. I said, "Can I be of help?" And he said, "Well, I live about 2 miles down the road. Possibly you could get me home, da-da-da-da-da." And I said, "I'm happy to. We'll call the garage, whatever." So I took him home, dropped him off. He was very appreciative. About 2 weeks later, he called me, and he had a home that was probably in the $500,000 range. And he said, "I'd like you to come up and look at my home." He said, after what you did for me, I'm going to put it on the market. I've been thinking about it, and I'd like you to list it." So that's just from stopping and picking up someone on the side of the road. And I actually sold the home for him, and then there were a couple of other sales that were sort of tied to that. And it was just a very interesting experience, all from just wanting to meet someone and help them, be kind to them. You know?
Yeah. And you've taught me that from early on. Never assume what somebody's position is. Never assume what their assets or resources are, because, you know, somebody could appear to be the simple farmer and have generational wealth beyond our wildest imagination. I mean, it's really, especially up here. I have Dale and I, we really started this to tell stories. So I was at Hannaford's in Bradford, and a gentleman in an older Chevy pulls up, and he's got a Latino American gentleman in the passenger seat, and you can tell that they're kind of like stopping after a day's work. And he sees me and my wife on our e-bikes. We have matching e-bikes that I got us as a gift for our birthdays. And he starts talking to me through the window about these e-bikes, and he's clearly knowledgeable about them. He's talking about regenerative braking, you know, the stuff that, you know if you are familiar with electric technology in vehicles specifically. So it turns out that this is a gentleman named Paul, who is one of the nicest farmers and also has a large landholding in the area. And talking to him, and I tell him I work with Dale, and Paul tells me, he says, "You call Dale, you tell him you met and you tell him he was the biggest dick you've ever met." and he got a real kick out of that, and he's known Dale a long time, and you know, Paul, you know, that's his demeanor and personality, and he's a hell of a nice guy, and that's the kind of thing that, you know, if I had been somewhat dismissive of this gentleman that took an interest in our e-bikes, you know, I would have never had this funny, like, you know, "Hey, Paul said," this real funny interaction to share with Dale.
Yeah, we have another, just to get off those stories, I'll tell one more, but we're working with a lady out in Newbury. Do you remember this?
Yeah, of course, Gene. Yeah, I remember.
And
Gene.
her husband stopped me at the recycling center in Newbury 3 or 4 years ago, and he had these old ripped jeans on and old overall type thing, and he said, "I don't have any money to put my trash in the recycling center." And I said, "How much do you need?" And he said, "Well, I could use $10. So I said, "Here's $10. He said, "I'll pay you back." And I never expected to see the $10 again. Well, it turns out he called me again about a month later and said, "We have 100 and some acres out in Newbury," and he's since passed away.
Right.
And but his wife is seriously thinking about maybe putting the house on the market at some time. So that's how, you know, you never know.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely in this area too. I feel what I've been trying to encourage through my membership with the chamber, and for anybody that doesn't know, I work with Airon at the Chamber of Commerce. I'm currently the chair, or I guess you'd call president of the Chamber of Commerce right now, trying to break down the maybe historic precedent that the chamber was just there and didn't really do anything. I feel like maybe it's a byproduct of the pandemic or maybe something prior to our involvement. I'm not at all going to fictionalize what has happened, but and Dale might know more than I do. I definitely feel like we're now coming into a chapter where the chamber is being viewed as being more of an asset than it maybe has recently. And I feel like that's definitely the next leg of the journey, in my opinion, to keeping the chamber relevant and keeping it involved in our communities, is to basically, bring us back into the fold of being something that the top producing businesses are affiliated with.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to tell a story.
Yeah, please.
So the Bradford Teen Hub.
Yeah.
They are our members at the chamber. And so is
The Bradford what?
The Teen Hub.
The
Oh,
Teen
yes.
Hub.
Okay.
And so is Running Water Recreation. And so this past Saturday, I had been talking to Emily Cummings. She's the executive director at the Teen Hub. And I was like, we should do like a back to school thing for the kids. And she was like, yeah, she was like, I want to get them more involved and just like fun stuff to do. And then I also had talked to Mike, who owns Running Water Recreation. And he was like, I didn't have as many people as I thought I would over the summer. And I was like, she wants her teens to do something. He needs teens.
Yep.
And so we planned it to have like for his location. So that was the first time, like I think all of those kids who attended the back to school bash, first time in Running Water Recreation.
Cool. Very cool.
And they did the bouncy houses and the archery tag and pickleball.
That's so awesome.
Like so many parents were like, we didn't know this was here.
Yeah.
And it was like those are the kind of the things that I'm trying to do is like, build connections. Like, hey, we know this business, we can work together. And so I think that was kind of maybe not what was missing.
Sure.
But then also people just didn't know like what the chamber could actually do.
Right. Well, it's something that is somewhat of a problem in this area is the lack of knowledge about local offerings. We have I met an individual at an open house for a listing that Dale and I had together last year that grew up in Rygate that had never been to Halls Lake in Newberry, had no idea it existed. We showed the property on the first day she'd been to the property was the first time she'd ever stepped foot onto the Halls Lake Circle. And that to me was surprising because this is an individual that spent a number of years in the Rygate, Vermont region, which is right next door. And that's something we also see with individuals who maybe just don't know other professionals. I have a contractor I work with regularly, and I was speaking to a local family most people would know, and he was like, no. And it's fine, totally fine that he has no idea who they are. But you'd think, generations or decades in the same, region, but you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
We're working on that every day, learning all the things we don't know.
I'm just so thrilled that you're trying to do that, to bring more people. Marvin and I, when Marvin Harrison was very involved in the chamber, and I
Still is.
Lisa,
Both.
we tried to branch out and go to Thetford and Orford, but we just couldn't make it happen. It just wasn't coming together. And we tried an open house down at my office. We had a chamber, what's the little gathering?
Business after hours.
Business after hours, and that was fun. But it seems like you're trying to expand it geographically too. And I think that's what has to happen to the chamber. Yeah. It just can't be Bradford oriented or Newberry oriented.
I know we've been working hard to make sure it's not one side of the river focused, because that is also very tough. We have a lot of offerings in Vermont. I mean, look at where we're recording this podcast right now. We're at the Space on Main in Bradford because Bradford has this. Unfortunately, the next one is probably Hanover, where you'd be able to find something similar with like a remote working facility, and it would likely be a more offering than Hanover.
Yeah, there is a chamber, Lebanon chamber, right?
Well, I'm thinking of the remote work facility, but yes, there is a Lebanon.
Yeah, so Lebanon and Hanover's chamber actually merged, and they're one now. Yeah.
Yep. Right, and then St. Johnsbury's fairly active, aren't North Country?
Yes, the Northeast Kingdom.
Northeast Kingdom.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of good organizations around us. I think. Would you say that they're experiencing similar difficulties that the Chamber of Commerce has encountered, or what are your thoughts from your role as an ED?
I think so. I think we're just coming from the pandemic. Like, that time was just like no one knew what to do.
Right.
And
Across
we still
the board.
kind of don't know what to do. And so people were like kind of scrambling, like, well, can we go outside? Can we be around people? Is my business going to be stabilized? Like, will it be here next year? And so I think now that is like the kind of the thing right now is like people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And back then it's like if you didn't know, it was okay because you kind of knew something was here. But like now it's like we just had a global pandemic. Like we don't know anything.
No, it's very. We're still seeing a lot of our attorneys' offices are holding the COVID policies. A big one that we use, Grossman and Rips in Norwich. They're still doing closings on the porch or in your car.
Yeah, was it Chan's Chinese restaurant in
Still
Bradford?
doesn't
It's still
do-
takeout only.
Yeah, takeout only. Yep. I think I've seen people go in there now.
Yeah, you can go in,
yeah.
but it's still.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm starting to see people. Just saw it at the post office this morning in Newbury. People wearing masks again.
Well, there's been a late summer surge.
Yeah.
That's and
I think you just hit the nail on the head. We didn't know what to do during the pandemic, and now people don't know what to do during recovery.
right. Or now that we're back to what we would call a more normal standard, but it's also a very tumultuous time. I mentioned to Dale at lunch that so you are now a new Vermont resident, right?
I am.
And you're very happy to be on the side of the river?
I am.
Yeah, no, I know. So I'd love to hear your experience as somebody who's relocated to this area, found housing on one side of the river, moved to the next side. That being our knowledge base, it's definitely where I have the most curiosity as to like your history and what you've experienced, because it is very interesting, and we don't see that story play out in, you are one of a kind, in my opinion, as far as anybody who's gone to VT Law, lived in Lyme, now you're in Thetford. Right. So I'm very curious as to your experience.
Oh, okay. So I moved here like when the housing crisis was insane,
2021. Yep.
And so trying to find housing really like, I moved here in August. And so I found housing in July.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
right before
I signed my lease like the 26th of July to move here.
August 1st.
And I moved in August 18th.
Wow. Okay.
And my house wasn't even ready yet. They were still working on it as we moved in.
From the tenants previous, you mean?
So the tenants previous, and then also it just, it was an older home, and he needed to put a little work into it. And what brought me to Lyme was one of my best friends. She was like, hey, you don't want your son going to school in South Royalton. And she was like, as a black kid, he's going to have a terrible experience.
Really? Interesting.
And I was like, okay, thank you. And then I heard the same thing from another mom whose daughter went to South Royalton. And so she was like, you need to live in the Upper Valley. I was like, what is the Upper Valley?
Right.
And so I started looking at homes in the Upper Valley, and I was like, this is the Upper Valley?
Right.
Like, I'm in the South right now. Like, rent is $600 maybe.
Sure.
And so got kind of like super lucky and found this house, and he was like, oh, you're the first person to even ask me about it. So it's yours. I was like, yes.
That's awesome.
Because, that my neighbor went to Vermont Law, saw the for sale sign, gave me the number. I think I meant for rent, gave me the number. I called, and he was like, okay, you're the first. I was like, I will send you the money like right now to hold it. And he was like, no, I believe you.
That's sweet.
And so then when I knew that I wanted to live on the Vermont side, I was like, okay, so now I need to find housing in Vermont. We are in a housing crisis. How am I going to do this? I didn't think I could. So I started looking at the Upper Valley rentals through Dartmouth. And I found my home in December. And I wasn't ready to move yet. I knew I needed to wait until like March to move.
Okay.
And so I looked at it, and I was like, it's not going to last in the Upper Valley like long.
Sure.
But, Lyme to Thetford is right there. So, like, I noticed crossing the bridge, like, no one had moved in. So I reached out, like, I think it was, like, the second or third week of February. And I was like, hey, is it still available? And they're like, yes. And I was like, I want it. And they're like, okay, thank you. And so I think, like, it was crazy because I hear other people's, like, housing experience. And I'm like.
I know, yeah.
I'm like, yeah, so I got lucky twice.
That's really fortunate, yeah.
And I was like. But then I'm looking for my friends. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard.
And it's tough. And it's also like like rent isn't cheap here.
No.
And we are seeing that surge of like, the Upper Valley. And I think a lot of it is coming from like that Hanover and Norwich area. And so since we're all kind of grouped together, we're paying like.
Oh, 100%. We've been speaking to the Hanover feeder markets or the places people live that work in Hanover, Dartmouth, and it's stretched as far north as Newbury, Vermont, Reigate, Vermont. I mean, people are, I would even say probably considering like Barnet and Monroe at this point, because you can hop on 91 and even in 45, 50 minutes, you're south to the hospital or the college. Mm-hmm. And that's, but to hear that you got so fortunate, that's really, my wife and I feel very similarly. We jumped on our house in November of 2021. It was next to 2 cemeteries and a high school, and we wrote an offer. I represented my then fiance, now wife, as her agent, and we jumped on the house because we were just so over neighbors and tenants that were drug users, and just the hassle of dealing with lack of control in your own home, which is a real bummer for anybody out there that's, renting that has those troubles. I sympathize because it's awful to have to carry your keys in your finger because you don't know who's going to be at the top of your stoop. I mean, it's something that it's one of the reasons I participate with the Little Rivers Board is I wanted to offer a resource for people that are having these addiction or substance use challenges or crises, because it's the only way we're going to see a solution is either, unfortunately, it's either resolution or incarceration. It's kind of the only 2 options that really result in any progress. Active addiction doesn't change
I agree. So, and that's another thing, like when you look at rural areas, drug addiction is usually pretty high there.
Yeah.
I actually just watched a documentary on, it's a limited series on Netflix called Painkiller, and it was about OxyContin and how they actually started with OxyContin in like always rural areas.
Sure.
Back pain, we're just going to overprescribe.
Sure.
And it talked about like, the higher the milligram, the more money that the doctor got.
Yeah, kickbacks.
And so then you kind of see that problem here. And I always say, we don't talk about seasonal depression a lot here either. And that's a real thing. Like I suffered from that, moving from like somewhere that always had the sun to like Vermont and New Hampshire. I'm like, what am I dealing with right now?
Has this summer been tough for you with all the rain and everything?
Yes. It like today I like woke up super early. I checked the weather. I was like, okay, it's not raining today. Let me go outside and run. So I can get some vitamin D, because it's just been like the summer has been the worst. You know, I'm like,
no, it really has. Yeah.
It's been the worst season. And so I'm like, and winter is coming. Like I see leaves changing already. I'm like,
I know.
So that means fall is like next week, and then we have 2 weeks of fall, and then boom, it's cold.
Yes, I know. We so I was actually just discussing this with my wife, that this summer has been very hard for people that experience that seasonal depressive disorder, or I guess we all experience it, but for people that take it a little harder, this summer's been really tough. And I think that we're seeing that. I mean, I think we spoke about it on the last podcast. There's multiple agents that I've been working with that are either in tears or on the verge of being in tears because of various deals and things that are happening. I mean, I know, the overall mentality, I feel, is pretty stressed after this summer.
Yeah.
And we did dodge a serious bullet with flooding. Did you have a similar experience where you were?
Yeah, so I dodged it, and like I'm right on the Connecticut River. Yeah, so lucky for me, I didn't experience like anything. But it's just like I always think like people that are living outside, living in tents.
Yeah.
Like you don't even have a break right now.
No. There hasn't been any sun.
Yeah, and there's been like there's not a lot of affordable housing. And it's like, what is affordable at this moment? Because like what affordable to me may be different from you guys.
Right. Well, for anybody.
Yeah. And so we even have to like think about what is affordable to the average person.
Right.
And like I went to the Bradford Select Board hearing, was it last week or the week before, and they talked about homelessness. And from my restorative justice background, I'm thinking like we have to offer resources. If we don't offer resources, like nothing is going to change.
Sure.
And those resources are if a person, like, yes, a lot of jobs are hiring right now. I get it. But if someone who is homeless, I don't think they're going to be able to go out and just get a job.
No,
and then if they do go out and get a job, how will they get there every day? We live in rural Vermont. We don't have really great transportation.
Right.
And so when I think about, like, I feel like those are excuses we make for certain people instead of like, wow, if we heard them, I'm pretty sure they'll say, well, the reason I am on drugs is because this problem or this problem.
Right.
And then we can see like how we can actually be a community to help them.
Right.
And because we all want a thriving community where our kids can stay, where more young people are here. But at the same time, we're all like, there's a lot of homeless people right now. There are a lot of drug users right now. But it's like we can't not talk about it and think punishing them will help. We actually have to be like, so what do you need?
Yeah, right. Well, what is the problem? I mean, I don't think we've actually really talked about this much on the podcast, but both Dale and I practice sobriety. I mean, it's something that it's not a easy journey in any way, shape, or form. It's not a copy and paste or a cookie cutter journey in any way, shape, or form. So that's something that I think you're dead on. The problem needs to be addressed.
But the huge difference is that we had the ability to get out of it by ourselves. We could afford to get out of it. Some of those folks can't.
Right. Well, and it's for a number of reasons. I mean, we were also lucky that we were just drinkers, and that's a very different path. It still can result in the same location or destination. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it can end up in the ditch no matter what. But unfortunately, there's a lot of you're referencing a documentary on Netflix. I mean, the start is typically an athletic injury or something that is just viewed as, it's just a small delay or a hurdle. They'll get through it. But then, I mean, it's unfortunate how readily available a lot of other substances are that then are actually cheaper than the medication that people maybe need. My wife, being a pharmacy tech, sees a lot of this. Obviously, there's a lot of privacy stuff where she can't share stuff with me. But I mean, she, in a general sense, I'm very aware of what the pharmacy's troubles are. And it's always, something. Yeah. I wanted to, sorry, you were going to say something, Dale? Or?
No, I was just going to follow up. So are you actively working with some of the homeless?
No, not like actively working with the homeless, but so Monique, she has this resilience committee. And so she just kind of started back up and really interested on how like I can help.
Good. Yeah.
I do think like a lot of it's a domino effect. We see a lot of small businesses needing employees, but then we also see a lot of people who want to work, but they're not able to work because they have some type of addiction, mental illness, whatever it may be. Something is like stopping them.
They've lost a driver's license or something.
And so it's like, how can we really help to fix all these problems? I mean, obviously we can't fix them all, but there are ways, I think there's steps that we're not taking to really have a better thriving community. I think a lot of people shunned people who are on, addiction, even like mental health, instead of like really trying to figure out what the problem was and what went wrong. It wasn't the addiction that is a problem, but that is not the problem. The problem could just be housing.
Well, I would propose too, so something that we are still kind of learning about, but something that didn't come into, I don't know exactly when it came into the knowledge base, but so it's called the uncanny valley, and it's a little bit of a stretch for me as somebody who's not a psychologist to describe, but this is my understanding of this thing. So the uncanny valley is the gap right between what we identify as normal human behavior and something that is artificial or something that is a replication of human behavior. And unfortunately, a lot of people with mental health challenges, or maybe people that have kind of fried themselves from various substances, fall in what's called the uncanny valley, where they're just off enough from what we consider to be normal human behavior that they make us feel very uncomfortable. They make us feel kind of unsafe. And that's where it's very similar to AI. A lot of people that have that same reaction to AI, it's called the uncanny valley. And I think that that's something that I personally think about when I am, in a situation and I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is awful. Like I can't believe what I'm seeing. I remind myself of that kind of natural form of like, my body's telling me to get away from this, but that's not going to help this individual. And then it's going to just continue to be an issue. I'm not saying I'm going up and hugging people on the street, but I'm, definitely trying as a person to recognize this thing that, it's a built-in response,
Try
fight
to
or
understand
flight.
People.
Right. And myself a little better too, figure out like, okay, like, cause especially people, my mother is an author and she wrote, she did something where she was working with the state of Vermont and their mental health history, and it's not very great. And so the first edition of the piece came out kind of like a more maybe a little bit more critical than the Vermont department would have appreciated. So then she worked with them, and they made something that was more about the progress that has been made since that time. And so I feel that there's a lot of opportunity for that, where if we don't just shut it down and we work with the various parties that are trying to provide some kind of resource, we might actually see some positive momentum. You just have to actually keep it going, which has been very tough. A lot of people have been very defeated over the past 36 months.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
I blame COVID for a lot of things.
I think and it's a good, even if it does take a scapegoat here and there, I think it's a good one. You know, I mean, take the role of a scapegoat here and there. I think it's a good one because it did also disrupt everything. I mean, we all expected a small vacation. And then the next thing we know, it's a global pandemic for multiple years.
Yeah, and I was told, like, the pandemic is what, like, housing here became so scarce. Like, everyone from, like, bigger cities was like, I want to be in Vermont and New Hampshire. It's small, it's rural. Yeah. But then, like, they did, but, like, the small folks, it, like, really impacted, like, the small, middle class, low middle class, individuals. Like, so my property tax are now increasing because you moved from like LA and you could afford this house that was $200,000, but now we know there's a demand in Vermont and New Hampshire, so we're gonna say $2.5 million now, and you're like, I had that.
It's been definitely something we are seeing on a daily basis in our line of work, but it's also the initial panic has dropped off, and now what's really happening, and the craziest part of it all, is we have data to support these values, and that's starting to get a little scary, that we are now having enough sale history that we can look back and see data that says that the regional values have increased by, give a percentage. It could be 20 to 50% easily across the board in a number of townships. And that's where we are not feeling terribly uncomfortable about 2024 in the housing market because of how many people still want to be here. Yeah. And I must say, while that's not a great thing when you're looking at the people that are trying to get the best deal possible on real estate, it is a good thing for the economy of the region. The fact that people want to be here, and when homes become available within a reasonable price point that certain parties can afford, they'll likely move here and then add those bodies and that energy to our communities. So hopefully that means that we're set up for some success in the next couple of years. The thing would be to have more housing populate so that we could keep a lot of our contributing members and then also add more contributing members. But that's of course a little bit of a pipe dream without any large scale developers. But that's
it's coming. Yeah.
Well, Vermont, we're very fortunate to have Act 250. I know a lot of people kind of criticize Act 250, but I think that me personally, I love the part where there's no billboards or no roadside advertising. So I do support it, even though it does restrict large scale developers from doing large projects. But I think that that's also, we probably should see more of, like, a Jonah Richards is a local entity that you're familiar with.
Yes.
Yeah, and he is, I think, a great example of what a developer over the next couple of years will look like, where they tackle a couple projects, one started, get it wrapped up, start the next, and to have that kind of sequential process, I think, is also just more friendly to our territory.
Yeah,
there's just so much.
He knows the area.
He's from here. He's from this region.
He has roots here, and he's young, and he also understands, like, hey, to get more younger people here, we need more housing. Yeah. So that's, like, the biggest thing in Vermont. Is, like, there needs to be more housing, affordable housing, even in New Hampshire. Yeah. And then I think certain, like, especially me, I tell my friends all the time, like, why do you want to live in Vermont? Because like, that's a question I get every time I go home. It's like, why are you staying in Vermont? And it's like the second whitest state in America. And I'm like, 4 seasons. And people are like, so you're in a white state for 4 seasons. And I'm like, but you have to come for all 4 seasons to understand, like, getting, not this summer. So I'm not counting this summer.
This
like last summer. Yeah, last summer. And then, fall, winter, and spring. Exclude mud season because that's the worst.
That's the bonus season.
Yeah, we have 5 actually. Yes. And so And when I tell people, like, no, Vermont is a place, especially for me, I think that I'm able to do, like, my wildest dream. Like, do things that, like, people like, what, you want to do this? Like, it's like, yeah, because they want your ideas, but they also want to keep it very Vermont. And I think that's what a lot of people get frustrated about. And it's like, no, we don't want, like, a big old shopping center in Vermont because, like, we want to go hiking. We just want to go kayaking. We just want to walk outside and see, like, mountains all day long.
Yeah.
But we do want to see family-oriented things. So, you know, we can do things outside of just, like, skiing and snowboarding.
Right. We're not
you
all
know,
ski
and
bums.
Yeah, you know, like, when it gets cold, like, I do not want to go outside.
As you say,
like,
winter's my video game season.
Yeah. You know, I'll go skiing because so my son say, you know, but it's like, I'm not doing this for fun.
Sure.
Like, this is not for fun.
This is for you.
Yeah, this is for you. Not
Your son's name's
for
Aiden?
me. Yes, Aiden.
Yeah,
like,
this is for you, Aiden.
This is definitely for Aiden. Like, I'm just here for the ride.
Right.
And so it's like when I tell people, they're like, wow, you get peace. I'm like, I get peace. Like, I get peace in Vermont. Like, do you know what it's like to have a peaceful life?
Yeah.
Especially coming from somewhere like Alabama. And I'm not saying where I grew up was bad or not peaceful.
Sure.
But what I am saying where I grew up is there wasn't a lot of opportunities for certain people, especially like Black people. Okay. I wouldn't really say we had a lot of like brown, like Latino or Asians. It was mainly just Black and white people.
Sure.
But I couldn't say, hey, I want to open up a dispensary, even though weed's not legal. But I couldn't say, hey, I want to open up like a nail salon. And white people be like, yes, let's support her. Like, we need more diversity here. We want to help her. It's been like here, like when I say, hey, I have an idea. Like, people are like, we want to help you with your idea.
Yeah.
Like, having people who like inspire you and people who are like wanting to feed into you. I think that is what rural Vermont is to me. Like, I can't speak for other people, but I can say for me, being in Vermont has been very refreshing. And it's been this opportunity that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. Like, I mean, I work for the Chamber of Commerce, you know, and it's like, so I'm the executive director, and people are like, no one knows you there. Like, how did you do that? Like, I'm like, I don't even really know how I did it.
You did a great interview.
I can't imagine. I've spent a little bit of time in Alabama, and just a very short period of time, but gosh, the culture, for me to go down from here now, because I believe all the things that you're saying, to go to Talladega, Alabama, I'm thinking, whoa, it would not work for me. You know. Right.
No, I think you're 100% correct that the people up here are very supportive. You know, and that's where I left and came back because while I'm incredibly fortunate to call Newberry, Vermont home, the entire demeanor of the state of Vermont, I feel, differs from other. And New Hampshire too, but I mean, and I consider the Upper Valley to be one like region.
Me too. It's the same.
It's all the same. I don't see the river as more than just something I have to cross. But it's really, people are supportive and they genuinely care. I would hope that anybody that, you know, is in our region that is struggling with something knows enough to ask for some help, because there's plenty of people. I mean, there's notable business owners that are involved in various groups around sobriety. There's people like us who are part of organizations, you know, various inroads with healthcare organizations, or even just people that we know. I think that's something that the Chamber is also going to benefit from with your continued involvement. Yeah. And I've really liked working with you at the Chamber.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Yeah, and we have a really diverse board.
We do. Right now we have a great mix.
And so when I say that, people are like, what do you mean diverse? I'm like, we have some old people.
That's why I had to leave.
Yeah, they were like
I was so old.
And I was like, we have some young people, and then we have people in between. But they all come from different backgrounds as well. So that's why I say we really do have a diverse board, and we work together to really just, because, you know, some live in New Hampshire. Most of us live in Vermont. Yes.
No, I agree. And I think we have one of the better, or as far as the strength of the board and the involvement of the members, I feel like we have a really strong foundation right now. And I would say that it looks like one of the better realities that we could bring with us into the future, honestly. I mean, as far as who's involved right now.
If people are listening to this and they have a problem one of the problems that we've been discussing, either a substance problem or a rental problem, should they be contacting?
They can. Yeah, they can email me.
Yeah.
And, you know, a part of us is like community. Like that's really what the Cohase Chamber is about. It's the community.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I know that's not technically business related, but, you know, if you have a problem and you don't know where to go, like you can come to me and like I have a member directory.
Well, exactly. We are a resource. And I think that's a great point, Dale, to put out into the zeitgeist that we are not just for the business owners, that we are for the region.
We're for the community.
Yeah.
The community.
The community.
Exactly. Yeah, we are for the community, and that's something.
That's something back when we were doing, I was on the board, we didn't seem to be able to get that across, and you're doing a good job at that now. Really, it seems to be changing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great.
Yeah, I really do. Like I went to a rural development conference last week in Rutland. Actually saw Marcy there, so it was like really good because you know I'm
Marcy
like
Carver.
Yeah, and so I wasn't thinking to see like really anyone from like you know the Upper Valley, even though you know Randolph is considered like kind of the Upper Valley
adjacent.
And so, but it was really good hearing people talk about like rural development. But even in that conversation, like there was really, in my opinion, there weren't a lot of people that were representing rural areas. You had a lot from like Burlington and Montpelier and like Bennington and Rutland. And not to say those aren't rural, but it is definitely like, this is rural.
Yeah.
And so I see those type of disconnects too. Like you need to kind of come ask us some questions. Because we can tell you what is really missing in rural areas. You know, it's kind of different from someone in Burlington to say, this is what we're doing, and then trying to put that in like a Bradford.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's insane. We have agents that'll travel from Chittenden County to look at listings in our territory, and they're like, so what's it like over here? We're like, not at all where you're from.
Not at all.
Because it is totally different. Like, you know, this, I mean, it's very similar to, like, I personally won't go to Rutland unless somebody were to make a specific request for me to do so, because I'm not familiar with how Vermont is on that side of the state. In my opinion, it feels a lot more like Pennsylvania because it's just this weird kind of amalgamation between Vermont and New York, especially when you get over towards where all the marble factories and stuff are. It really starts to feel like Pennsylvania Dutch almost. Kind of bizarre.
I've lived a little bit different areas, but I don't think we could live any better place than the Upper Valley of
Agreed.
Vermont.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, and I must say, if there wasn't a better note to end on than you know how much we all love our territory. Airon, thank you for coming and sitting down with us.
Oh,
and,
thank you guys for inviting. This is
we'd love to have you on in the future.
Yes.
Good discussion. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and we look forward to hearing in the future the progress that the chamber
Can you post
making.
Darren's email or something?
I can put Aaron's email in the the notes from the podcast. Absolutely. Awesome.